Welcome, beautiful people. Welcome to episode 2. Yep. I hope everybody's doing well. Hope you all had a wonderful day. But without further ado, we are here on episode 2 of In Light of Spirit. And for today's topic, we're going to talk about abuse. Obviously, there are many types of abuse. I want to say that we're going to focus and kind of circle this episode more around perhaps child abuse. So before we really get into all the parts of this episode, let me start by saying that we don't have a guest today, not for this one. We probably will do a part 2 of this episode and have perhaps a licensed therapist come on in the future, or a psychologist or some form of expert on the subject. So we will do that in a part 2 of this. We will revisit this topic. So let's start with defining abuse. When I define abuse personally, I define it as using something to an egoic effect. Using something to an egoic effect. And when we get down to the brass tacks and really the basics of it, it's misuse, kind of period. Misusing whatever you're doing, right? So let's define a couple other things as well. I want you guys to really kind of wrap your heads around these subjects as well, these concepts. So we have subjective action. Okay, subjective action are actions based on influence, personal feelings, or opinions. They're personal feelings, tastes, opinions, or trauma. So they're very thought-based. When you look at subjective actions, they're very thought-based. And sometimes, backing up to what I just said too, sometimes they are trauma-based. They're influenced. When you have objective action, which when people typically think objective, they think kind of the overall picture, the big picture. So when you have objective action, it's not influenced by personal feelings or opinions. They are, in fact, as a matter of fact, considering and representing facts. So they're more conscious-based versus thought-based. So when we look these up, when we consider these concepts, the reason I bring these up is because we all have experienced abuse in our lives in some form or another. The message I wish to really insinuate in this episode the most is this: we may have abuse in our lives, but we always have a choice of whether or not we identify and manifest that abuse, ergo many times becoming that abuse or an abuser, in really projecting that trauma. You become an abuser. In other words, hurt people, you guys. So now we're going to go through the part of our episode where we get into our research and stats. So I was able to do a little research, obviously, and find 4 types of child abuse. And this is touchy, you guys. It's episode 2. Before we get into this, I really, really, really want us to be able to talk about anything on this channel, no matter how touchy the subject. But full circle, I'm back to, let's refocus on the research I did. So we have 4 types of child abuse that we could talk about. We have physical. Okay, and physical is self-explanatory. You have sexual abuse, rape, molestation, child pornography. And we're hearing a lot about that in the film and music industry, unfortunately, right now, because of a lot of the trafficking that we're that we're talking about, that's being exposed, and a lot of the sexual child abuse that's gone on in the industry since really the beginning of the industry, since Hollywood was a thing. That type of stuff has been going on, and it's awful. It's awful. You know, it's. I'm not gonna dwell and go into my own personal reminiscence of that, because I've seen it enabled a lot. Yeah. So we have physical, we have sexual child abuse, we have neglect, where you have physical neglect and emotion, or educational, You have physical neglect and educational. You have emotional abuse, aka verbal, mental, psychological, aka verbal, mental, psychological, manipulation, and emotional neglect. So, neglect and emotional are kind of, they're kind of in the same ballpark in a way. And then we could even get into other types of abuse, because those are the big ones with child abuse. But we have a couple more types. We have financial and material abuse. We have modern slavery. There's discriminatory abuse, organizational or institutional abuse. Those things, I think, really hit it on the nose with America. We see a lot of that in America, and you could probably see that in a lot of third world countries too. But you see a lot of financial and material abuse in America. And I feel like a lot of that can enable addiction too. Or the organizational or institutional abuse. We have a big history with that. But to reel it back in, a couple more types of abuse. You have self-abuse, which is self-harm, drug addiction. And you have power and energy abuse, so being an energy vampire or having a control fixation complex. And that is one that I think that we are starting to talk about a lot more, because of the fact that we are addressing and talking about narcissism quite a bit more these days. So it's interesting seeing the abuse that you can be surrounded by on a daily basis, and it's interesting seeing not just what you might be surrounded by, but more so the enabling of it. That's even, I would even say enabling is even worse than it's even more dangerous than the abuse itself. So we're gonna move on. I do have a journal entry, and I'm gonna try to keep it short and sweet. So I'm just gonna read it verbatim, but out of respect for my family members, I'm not gonna name any names. I will not get specific with the abuse that I experienced, because none of you are watching. Probably most I would say the mass majority of you watching probably don't really know me all too personally. I'm all about transparency, however. I do love everyone on earth, including the people of my family. I would never want them to feel as if I viewed them poorly, because we all make mistakes. Sometimes there are long periods of our lives that are just not good, and our choices aren't any better than... our choices aren't good either. Our life isn't good, our choices aren't good. It's just the way the cookie crumbles. If you're going through something rough, then it's hard to make good choices sometimes. Especially in survival mode. Sometimes when you're in survival mode, you do what you have to do. I don't want to rant too much, because I have to keep this in a certain time frame. So, going back to what I was reading too. I can say that I had a lot of trauma. Not some, but I had a lot of trauma from my from my childhood, and it was enough to make me suicidal for a while. That's henceforth, my first episode here on this channel being about suicide. That trauma didn't just lead to it, it definitely enabled it. And that's subconsciously probably why, going through my 20s, I was so adamant about being a health nut and having healthy habits, healthy relationships, trying to be as mature as possible. And I will say as well that I think that due to me trying to, I guess, karmically correct the abuse that I experienced, due to me trying to correct that, I might have been a little harsh on people around me when it came to calling it out, because I've always been a very direct person. I've always been a very, real with it person. I always try to be as honest as possible, and, screw your feelings. If I'm telling the truth, I'm telling the truth. So, with that being said, I think there are times that I can admit to the fault of maybe not being as gentle as I could have been about things. And I think over time, it made it kind of, it made it hard for me to keep relationships around or really be sociable, because of the fact that, if I saw something that I knew was not a healthy choice, I'd make you feel bad about it, because I didn't want you to do it. I didn't want to see you doing it. I didn't want you to do it. I didn't want to see you hurt yourself. But I just had this habit of kind of talking down to people because of that. And so I guess the main message that I wanted to really portray, and so I personally feel that there are two really important facets to processing and growing past your abuse. And they are understanding the environment that ensued around you, and understanding and owning your faults. You have to when you understand your environment, it helps you identify the root of the abusive patterns and recognize them. Now, admitting your faults is also very important, because you have to understand how you might adopt or adapt these abusive patterns, and therefore contribute to the abusive pain body. As a whole, these two concepts can help us verify how much abuse you truly allow in your life, internally and externally, and you have to verify the allowance of that abuse in your life. And that's key, because allowance is something that, at the end of the day, you have control over. Whew, I'm glad I redid that, because I wrote 3 paragraphs worth of things with that, so I'm glad I did that. So before I get into my dream, I want to talk about a couple of concepts as well. When you're going through your early 20s, you're going through this period of time where you're still kind of you're basically trying to transcend into adulthood. And so you're still taking you're taking all of the trauma that you experienced from your childhood, and you're trying to evolve and move past it and learn from it, but also let a lot of it go and release a lot of it. So on that note, eventually we start to learn the difference between our ego and our conscious, which both of those voices, both of those perspectives, both of those perceptions are in our mind. You have your ego, in that voice in your head that's kind of stressed, worried, exhausted, mad, fear-based, perspectives and angles in your mind, fearful ones that stem from trauma, much of which you have trapped in your subconscious from your childhood. And then you have consciousness. Consciousness is your true self, your soul, your I am, the that voice in you, that adrenaline that's just like, hang in there, everything's gonna be okay. I need to just step back and rest. It's the voice that's true ration in your head, true rationality. Not the worried thoughts and the fearful ones, but the loving ones, the balanced ones. So you develop over time, in your 20s, you develop a sense of maturity, and you develop kind of a understanding of the difference between your ego and your consciousness, or whatever you might call it. And when you go through your Saturn return, and most people go through their Saturn return when they reach 27, or maybe, but it happens between really the ages of like 27 and I want to say 32, maybe 33. You go, so it's a period of time where you go through karmic correction, and hopefully you can realize this before then, but usually you realize the correlation with reality and co-creation. From understanding your correlation between reality and co-creation, you get to a point where you understand that reality is co-created by you and the universe. So you're in constant co-creation with the universe to create your reality. And you do this by understanding how to use your own presence in your life. Your consciousness versus your thoughts. And your consciousness versus your egoic thoughts. Your egoic thoughts are the thoughts that don't really serve you, right? So we get into our consciousness versus our egoic thoughts. Your conscious thoughts are there to serve you. Your egoic thoughts are there to torture you and attach. Your egoic thoughts are just going to kind of act as an attachment to your trauma, or your old self, the self that you left behind yesterday, right? So when it comes down to consciousness, your consciousness starts with awareness. Just a second, guys. 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so your consciousness starts with awareness. It starts with you becoming aware of yourself, who you are, and becoming aware of the difference between maybe that egoic voice in your head versus that conscious voice in your head, kind of the yin and yang. And you don't just have your conscious voice either, you have your subconscious voice, which is kind of like, so you have your ego, and that's kind of the surface level of everything. And then you have the conscious part of yourself, which is like that enlightened one. But you have the shadows too, and they're not necessarily bad. We have shadow work, and that shadow, that more shadowy part of consciousness, the more mysterious part. It's kind of like that next light at the end of the tunnel. Once you've reached the light, it's kind of like that next part. It's like what happens after you reach the end of the tunnel and you're in that light. Then you're conscious, right? What happens after that? Well, we work in that consciousness and we grow. And when you grow, eventually you have to look deeper again. And that's the mysterious part. That's your subconscious. Your subconscious is what's going to really push you to grow even deeper in your life, right? So you become aware of that consciousness, and then your subconscious kind of comes along and says, well, if you're going this direction, you're going to have to grow in this way. You're going to have to deal with this. You haven't dealt with this yet. So you're being called to deal with this, right? And so you look deeper and you work on it, and then you grow some more, and you grow more in your consciousness at a deeper level, and you have a whole new light at the end of the tunnel that you're working through, right? So that's essentially what we have to learn through our 20s, kind of work through in our 20s. We work through all of our trauma that has been kind of stored in attached and kept in our subconscious. I don't like this lighting, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn that up a bit. Much better. Okay, now you can see me. Where was I? So, you work through how to understand your consciousness and your ego and your subconscious. Your subconscious is like your next level. And then understand, when you get to... I want to say, because I'm going through it right now, so I haven't necessarily been through it yet, but going through it now, what I'm starting to realize is that when we get to the end of our Saturn return, and we really kind of master more or less how to utilize our consciousness and our presence, then eventually we utilize how to manifest things from our consciousness and our presence. And then we find... just made myself a London fog not too long ago. We learn how to use, our presence, our self, our gifts, who we are, to really manifest our life every day and create the reality, manifest the reality that we feel our life is supposed to be, that we envision. So that's kind of the fruits. I'm not going to say that. That's kind of the lesson that we have to learn through abuse and just hardship in our lives, and the trials in our lives. Those are the lessons, in the big picture. So we're going to move on to a couple of different things. I'm going to keep it short and sweet, just again because of time. With my personal experience, I don't want to exploit anyone. So I'm going to tell you that I've experienced drug abuse throughout my life. I've never really partaken, but I've experienced watching it through friends and family. I did experience physical abuse, and I've been around domestic violence quite a few times, and gang violence. I grew up with that. And with a lot of that comes verbal and emotional. And obviously, when you have drug abuse, you're going to have addiction around. And on a very personal level, I will say I have been sexually assaulted before too. And so I've experienced my fair share of sexual abuse. I've even experienced sexual abuse within institutional abuse, because it happened in the workplace, where I was sexualized in the workplace. I've experienced that. It's awful, and I probably am masking right now as if I'm saying it lightly or nonchalantly, because I really want, as I've said before, I really want this channel to be a place where you can talk about anything. But there's a hole in my heart right now at the moment. I'm a human being, so as much as I might sound monotone or sound nonchalant, I'm just trying to get through this episode, you guys. So, anyway. But I want to move on to, so that's my personal experience. I've had a lot of those things. Going back to, if you know me personally, then you know what I'm talking about. You know what I've been through. For those of you that, are just watching this and, we don't know each other personally, I don't feel the need to get into that. Unless you're calling me because you need help, you need someone to talk to. I don't feel the need to really dive into that too much. Just because this isn't what this is about. This isn't my therapy. This isn't a therapy session for me. This is, a channel where you're meant to not feel alone. So we're gonna get into dreams. I have a little entry that I wrote about it, so I'm just gonna read it. I dream about family a lot. It's a big part of my pain body, in which I am always processing. Dreams, as always, have many meanings. It's really up to you to personally interpret them. Dreams about family, in the general sense, can typically mean that there is something rooted deeply that may need examination. Your family is supposed to be your roots. your family's supposed to be the foundation in which you emanate from. Ergo, if you dream of your family, whatever you experience in that dream is definitely worth, some introspective ponder. So, this is really the end of the episode. I don't see that anyone has really tuned in on the live stream here. So, I'm going to really leave you guys with this. When it comes to processing your abuse, when it comes to working on yourself, we've all been abused, everybody has pain somewhere along the line, and it's not meant for us to compare to each other. It's not meant for us to try to one-up each other, and it's not a competition of who's hurting worse or who's been through what. There's pain all over the place from all different sorts of things, walks of life. But at the end of the day, is that what you choose? And I say this very heavily. Is that what you choose to make your life about? Do you choose the fear, the pain? Or do you choose love? Do you choose to try to find a reason to smile? Because as much as life might suck, you can find a reason. It's hard sometimes. It's hard all the time, especially in the state with the state of the world. It's very difficult these days. Sometimes you just have to find the littlest thing that will make you smile, and focus on that. Don't be unaware of what's going on around you, but at the same time, do be aware of your energy and what you're projecting and what you are manifesting just by being attached to certain things, certain experiences. It's not easy to let go of abuse. It takes people sometimes their whole lives. In fact, sometimes people go their whole lives without letting go of their trauma. And they have a whole lifetime just based and rooted with that trauma. Everything that they've done is a trauma response. So I ask you the question. I'm going to leave you with this question. What is your choice going to be? Do you want to manifest the life that you dream of? Or the life that you know you deserve, which is one filled with love and happiness and tranquility? Or are you going to choose to attach yourself to the trauma and all the abuse and all the pain and use that as a reason to do what you do and live your life and manifest the life that you have? Because you can manifest whatever. It's up to you to do the work and manifest whatever it is that you want or need. It's up to you. It doesn't just happen that way. You have to manifest it yourself. You have to do the work. And so, what are you going to choose today? No matter how hard it was, what are you going to choose today? Are you going to choose love or fear? And I think that's a good spot to wrap up. So, I look forward to seeing all of you on episode 3. Don't be strangers. Please tune in on our live streams. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, call in. I really want you guys to call in. I want to interact with you guys. I really, from the bottom of my heart, want to interact with you guys on this channel. And hopefully you'll find yourself watching some of our other content. It's going to be a lot more lighthearted. This is a little more heavy, but I figure we could start with the heavy lifting, and then kind of chill later. That's how I like to do things. But once again, thank you for joining. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being. And I will see you guys next time.